Hello and welcome to a new video. I'm so excited about this one. I am thrilled to have with me today the beautiful and very wise Anne Osbourne, who I believe is a legend in the raw food community. I will start by saying, in case you're new here, welcome. My name is Tumi. I am a dancer, a doctor, a medical doctor, and a poet. And I love helping people achieve and uncover and live their most delicious and healthiest lives. And I do that through my healing dances that I create and perform for people and through my expertise and my experience as a physician. On this channel on YouTube, I love creating videos around holistic health in general, my raw vegan lifestyle, which I've been part of now for over 11 years, coming on 12. Minimalism as a beautiful act of empowerment and health, and lots of dance. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then subscribe down below if you're not already. And let's get into this beautiful interview with Anne. Anne, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be joining you today for the interview. Thank you.
It's a pleasure of mine. And I just want to start by sharing with you, in case you don't know, and others for sure, how I came to know Anne. Anne has been in this, again, lifestyle. She'll tell you, I think it's been over 4 decades now, maybe, or at least 3 decades. And I got the chance to meet Anne at the 2013 Woodstock Food Festival. By this point, I was already 2 years raw, and I was presenting at the festival. And I just felt Anne's energy to be one of such love and lightness of being, if that makes sense. And I was so drawn to that. And for me, I think she's such a beautiful testament to this lifestyle, that it's not just about eating raw, but it's about taking on the vibration of love, which I think is exactly what this lifestyle is all about. And she's a mama. And so what I'm really excited about with this interview specifically is to talk about the intersection between raw veganism, living a healthy lifestyle, and mothering or parenting. So to kick it off, I would love to just hear, if you could just share with us, Anne, a little bit about how you came into the raw vegan lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it started really when I was 20 and I was at university, and I became aware of certain practices in the dairy industry and the egg industry that I was personally not comfortable with. And I really knew in my heart that I needed to give up all animal products and become vegan. I was already vegetarian. And it was nothing to do with health. As far as I knew, I was 20 years old. I didn't have any health issues or concerns that I was aware of, and it was purely for ethics. So overnight, myself and one of my best friends, we said, right, this is it, giving up all animal products. And at the time I was at university, and my student digs were at the bottom of the hill, and there was a big hill that led up to the campus. And every day when I had reached the top of that hill, I was tight in my chest and I was wheezy. Didn't really think much of it, wasn't a huge problem. But the very next day, after I gave up animal products, I was at the top of the hill and I suddenly realized, and it really hit me tight in the chest, and I wasn't wheezy. And I never got tight in the chest or wheezy ever again like that. And because it was the very next day, I just made that connection. I was like, oh, wow. What we eat, what we put in our bodies affects how we feel. And I'd never really considered it before, being 20, being, what I thought it was in a pretty good state of health. And really from that moment on, that was a real turning point in my life, because from that moment on, I really wanted to know about different types of vegan diet, how food affects us. I was vegan for ethical reasons, and I still am. And that's the foundation for me. But now there was a whole other aspect to giving up animal products, an increase in health and well-being. And so I tried different types of vegan diet. I tried an Anne Wigmore, a lot of wheatgrass sprouts. I tried a macrobiotic vegan diet, which was mostly cooked food. And I tried a general whole foods vegan diet. And I felt pretty good on all of them, but not that good that I stuck with any one of them for more than about 18 months. And then when I was 24, I was part of a local animal rights group in my hometown of Leicester in the UK. And we had speakers sometimes. And at one of the meetings, we had a speaker called David Shelley. And David Shelley was a local Leicester lad, but he was also a fruitarian. And he looked great. He had all this energy. He cycled everywhere. He had a great skin, teeth and hair. And it was just like, wow, whatever he's doing is working really well for him. And at the end of his talk, there was a group of us, we were all ethical vegans. We all thought, right, we want some of what he's got. And we all started out on a fruitarian diet. Now, I was in the early stages of pregnancy at the time, so I thought I'm going to do a transitional period. I didn't want to go straight onto a fruitarian diet, even though I'd been gradually refining my diet, so gradually cutting out things like white sugar and white flour and more refined vegan foods. I thought, if I just go straight to a fruit diet, I could get elimination. It might not be the best thing for the baby that I'm carrying. So I did this gradual transition. A lot of my friends, they went straight from a sort of whole food vegan diet onto the fruit diet, but I did it a bit more slowly. And I just loved it right from the beginning, the simplicity of it, because I'd liked doing the macrobiotic diet, but it was like 4 hours of cooking a day and all this food prep. But we formed an organic buying group. So even though we were all pretty low income, we were able to afford really great quality organic produce from all over the world, because we were in the UK and not like in Australia at the moment, where we get great fruit, local fruit all year round. In the UK, that doesn't happen. So having this buying group was wonderful, because we got boxes of the most wonderful fruits, and it was so simple. It was like, you got a box of fruit, we divide it between the 6 of us, and we ate mono meals, simple mono meals. And I really felt resonance with that simplicity of just eating mono meals of good quality fruit. And quite honestly, the fruit was so good that to mix it with anything else would have taken away from it. So it was a very good foundation to start off with. Not only did we have access to good quality fruit, which I think is really important, but we had that social connection with each other, 5 or 6 of us, all starting out on this new way of eating. So yes, I felt very blessed to have discovered this diet, and I've stuck with it, and it's stuck with me ever since. And it's been about like 32 years now. So
incredible. What a beautiful story. And there are a couple elements of the story that I just want to put a spotlight on. You spoke so eloquently about it, but a couple of them are just this idea of gradual transition, because I think people could get this idea many times of, I have to just quit everything cold turkey and go towards all raw or all fruit. And I love your story, the kindness, the self-kindness you gave yourself with a gentle transition. I thought that was really beautiful. And how you saw immediate change on that hill, not going raw even, just stopping the animal products. I loved that, hearing that. I also really appreciated, Anne, when you shared about pregnancy. I get a lot of questions from patients and clients about, I've now discovered being raw and I just want to go all out, and they're breastfeeding or they're pregnant and they're coming from a standard American, Australian, fill in the blank diet. And just hearing your approach, I think I really believe in a gentle transition, especially during these times when we're creating a new child or we're feeding. So I loved hearing that. And I'm curious, you already mentioned that you were pregnant during this time of going into fruit. And the one last thing I loved is the simplicity, because I resonate with that. I think almost 12 years into being raw, I'm fruit-based raw, and there's so many dinners that are just fruit. I have several days of the week that's just all fruit, because I love the simplicity. It's just so beautiful. So I resonated with that. So you were pregnant. I believe you have 2 children. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So I was pregnant with my elder child at the time when I went into the diet. And you were saying transitional diet, and I really valued that time. And especially looking back on that transitional period now, I think that was one reason why I have been successful long term with the diet, because during that transitional diet, I really got to know what worked best for me. And just because that worked best for me, it might not work best for someone else. Someone might find that their ratios are 80% raw, 20% cooked, or 90% raw, 10% cooked. But during that transitional period, there'd be times when I'd just have fruit, simple fruit meals, and there'd be other times when I'd have some cooked vegan food. And mostly that was just something very, very simple, like a baked potato or a baked sweet potato in the evening. So having fruit in the day, and in the evening having a cooked meal. But what I noticed for myself was that if I had a cooked potato more than one day, so 2 days in a row, my body odor would change. The way I felt the very first thing in the morning, the taste in my mouth would be different. And I got to the point where I was ready to let go that remaining percentage of cooked food. And it was easy because I was ready to let it go. Nobody was saying, you have to do this now. And I still wanted to eat the cooked food. I didn't want to. I got to the point where I felt better when I was having 100% raw fruit-based diet. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but that transitional period showed me that for myself, 100% raw worked best. And that might not be the case for everybody. So I really value that period. And also, I can still remember how I felt during that time, how I felt on the days I had all raw compared to the days that I had 80 or 90% raw. And I still felt pretty good, but just not as good. So because I wanted to feel the best I could, I was ready. I was ready at the end of that transitional period to go on the 100% raw fruit diet. And yeah, so I very much value that transitional period. And some of the pioneers of this movement, such as Arnold Ehret and Essie Honorable, they also in their works extol the benefits of that transitional period. And I especially like Essie Honorable. Essie Honorable was a South African lady, and she had very bad health, and she met her husband Cornelius, and he was researching and practicing fruitarian diets in South Africa, and they were doing research at the University of Pretoria. And she had to go, really, she had such bad health issues that she had to go straight on a fruit diet, because otherwise she might not have lived. But she said afterwards, it was so hard. It was so hard for her, but it saved her life. But she recommended for other people to do a transitional period, unless you really have to go straight on a fruit diet. If your health's really that severely impaired, that you really need to do that 100% straight away. So it's very interesting, and I do resonate with what both Arnold Ehret says about a transitional period and Essie Honorable. And for me, not so much at the time, but especially looking back, I can see the value of it for helping me remain on this path. Because if I'd have gone straight onto a fruit diet, I wouldn't have had that knowledge of doing 80%, doing 90% raw, doing 100% raw, and feeling the best on 100% raw. So, yeah.
I think there's such wisdom in that. And a lot of patients I have struggle with this. I need to be 100% raw because they've read the literature, they've talked to people, and they think this is the best for them, but they haven't felt it's the best for them. So it's more about dogma than really noticing, like you did. And I have gone through that for sure, is going through, oh, what happens if I eat cooked this or cooked that, and seeing how it feels in your body, your bowel movements, your body odor, your mood, your energy, all of those things, your fitness. And then you're able to then craft from a place of self-love as opposed to dogma, the best diet for you. And I really agree. It's been my experience too, that it keeps me raw easily because I allowed myself experiments. I was never, and even today, I still don't say I'm 100% raw because I don't ever want to feel like I'm caged. I don't have any desire to eat cooked, but I love the idea of it is a choice, and it's a choice from self-love, not from anybody's dogma. So I resonate so strongly. I'm curious to know if you can share a little bit about your 2 pregnancies and maybe even the births on raw. Now, I know you were already transitioning to raw in the first pregnancy, but you weren't all raw. You weren't eating as you are now. Can you talk about the differences between, if you noticed, eating a raw diet and being pregnant and birthing a child versus later on or before that not being raw?
Yes, certainly. That's a great question. And so with my first child, the pregnancy, I wasn't 100% raw. With my second pregnancy, I'd been raw for around about 12 years. And both pregnancies were great. Because even though I wasn't 100% raw with my first pregnancy, I was maybe 80, 90% overall raw. And I was eating good organic produce and exercising well and all the other things, getting sunshine, getting fresh air, positive thoughts, good relationships with other people. So all these things that you need for a healthy pregnancy. And so both pregnancies, I felt very well. With my first pregnancy and my second pregnancy, I only put on 10 kilos, which I think is 22 pounds. So with both pregnancies, I only really put weight on my chest and my bump. There wasn't really much of a change in the rest of me. And I was still very active right up until the end of my pregnancies. With my first pregnancy, I worked quite a physical job until I was 7 months pregnant. With my second pregnancy, I was doing massage therapy and I worked until I was 8 months pregnant. And with both pregnancies, I didn't really show. So nobody knew I was 8 months pregnant at work while I did massage. Nobody knew until I said, actually, I'm leaving now because I'm pregnant. And they were like, what? Because I had some baggy pants on. And so, yeah, I had the energy to work. I loved being pregnant, all the hormones. I think one issue when people are not living such a natural diet and lifestyle, the endocrine system is compromised. And as a massage therapist, I've just seen how many people are on thyroxine, how many people have issues with their endocrine system. And I think with pregnancy, again, if your endocrine system is not in balance, pregnancy can be challenging. But when it's in balance and all your hormones are ramped up and it's like, I just felt on top of the world with my pregnancies, had so much energy, loved it, loved being pregnant. And the births, so with my first child, I wanted a home birth. Now, I don't know if this is a genetic thing because it happened to my sister. I have a very long second stage during birth, and that happened with both pregnancies. The first pregnancy, I wanted a home birth, but it was within the National Health in the UK. So I didn't have a private midwife. And after I'd gone for a while, a long second stage, they said, right, we're taking you into hospital now because we want to monitor the baby. They monitored the baby, everything was fine, but I felt quite rushed. And I had a natural birth. With both my pregnancies, I had no drugs, no gas, no air. Breathing was the way. I did have pain, but the breathing that I did got me through that. And I didn't feel any desire to say, hey, I've had enough now. I want some gas and air or some drugs. I felt very in control of my labor, not having any drugs and breathing, because I was totally in control of that breathing. I think had I had a drug, because one of the reasons that I gave up alcohol many, many years ago was I felt my consciousness changed. I was no longer in control in the same way when I was drinking. And I think with the giving birth, I appreciated that, being in control of my pain using breathing. So with both births, I didn't take any medication or gas or air or anything like that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it if that's what you want to do. But for me personally, I felt really empowered breathing through the pain and getting through it. So with both pregnancies, there was a long second stage. With the second pregnancy, I had a private midwife in Australia and she was lovely. She had the warmest hands. So she'd put her hands on me and it was just like, oh, lovely. And she didn't rush me. She monitored the baby in my own home. I had a water birth with Cappy, who's my younger child. And it was very, very similar to the first birth, but I wasn't rushed. I was allowed to have that long second stage because baby was being monitored. Obviously, if anything had been wrong with my baby, I was 5 minutes from the nearest hospital. I was booked in there in case I needed to go in, but was really, really enjoyed having that birth at home after the first one not quite working out. Also, with the first birth, they gave me an episiotomy because they were saying, you've got to, we want to hurry up, we want to hurry up. And I had that healing to deal with after giving birth. And I thought, well, maybe I'll tear because I've already had an episiotomy. But because I wasn't rushed with a second birth, I didn't need anything. I didn't tear hardly at all. I didn't need no stitches or anything. So the day after I gave birth, I was kind of, had all my energy back and everything, which was just amazing. But the thing that really struck me, the differences between the two pregnancies. So with my second pregnancy, I was 12 and a half years older when I gave birth. But my stomach went back to flat the next day. And I was just like, I said to my partner at the time, my stomach, you might be, because with my first child in the transitional period, my stomach probably took 2 or 3 months to go flat. The next day after giving birth, and I got my partner at the time to take a picture of my stomach, I said, I can't believe it. Yes, it wasn't as toned as it was before, but it was flat. And all my weight, that I lost all the weight that I'd gained in labor, I think, just the process of giving birth. But the really big thing that I noticed between the two pregnancies, even though I was 12 and a half years older with my second pregnancy, was that my body recovered so much quicker being on 100% raw on a fruit-based diet. And that really blew me away, because I thought, being older as well, it's going to take my body longer to recover. So that really made me think, wow, even though both pregnancies had been brilliant and I felt great with both pregnancies, the recovery period was a lot quicker with the second pregnancy.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I think it's going to be so empowering to many women who are hearing this, a lot of what you shared. One of the things I love that you highlight is having an empowering birth at home if you can, but if you have to, also in the hospital, still using your breath work wherever you are to really try to empower yourself and stay in the moment. But also appreciating the reality is that you are often rushed in a hospital system. I think that is worldwide the case. And I'll just share it. Along with Anne, very similar. I have one beautiful child, and I had him at age 42 years old. And I think if I had been in America, first of all, nobody would have wanted me to come into a lot of these like clinics, birthing clinics. It would have been hard to have done that. I had him at home. And it was a free birth. It was just me and my beloved, my partner, Jare, and Sky. Sky was already my child. We were the only ones present. And Anne and anyone who's listening, if you don't know my story already, I have some YouTube videos about this. It took me 3 days. And I was, again, I'm more than 99% raw, more than 99.9% raw, but I thought I would push the baby out in 3 days, 3 hours, excuse me. I thought it would be super quick, but my body needed time. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think genetics is one of them, but I also think I had some first chakra safety, really being able to feel safe and to bring, frankly, a brown child into the world and feel like he was safe in this world. I had to really go into myself and into my spirituality to feel like my cervix could relax and birth my child. And it took 3 days, but in those 3 days, I felt strong. I was only powered on orange juice. I was breathing. I was dancing. I was in the water. Water was very important to me, like you. And I was holding my beloved. I was making love with my beloved. It was an orgasmic, ecstatic, free birth, powered by raw foods. And so for anybody out there, hopefully hearing a little bit about from me and definitely Anne with 2 births, that you don't have to be 100% raw, that just eating a high raw diet can really help for healthy pregnancy and birth. And same thing, my pregnancy was completely symptom-free. And I think this is the norm. As Anne said beautifully, when we are riding the natural waves of healthy hormones, we're able to ride pregnancy and the birthing experience is this beautiful watershed of such intelligence of hormones that help you birth naturally and healthily. So I love that you mentioned the hormonal health, and hormonal health is absolutely aided by a healthy diet. And the raw fruit diet, I think, is kind of the epitome, the zenith of that. So thank you for sharing about the differences and also the similarities of the pregnancies, and also how it's not just diet, how it's also thoughts and community and all of that. It's lifestyle and sunshine and movement, all of that that help to create healthy children. So sticking on those lines, moving forward in the journey of mothering, can you share a little bit about how you see how being raw, being fruit-based raw, has influenced your mothering outside of birthing and pregnancy?
Well, I think I feel really, really fortunate that I discovered this diet when I was in the early stages of my first pregnancy, because I'd always thought I really want to have children. I'd always liked kids and thought, it's just beautiful spending time with young children. And one thing I really wasn't looking forward to, because I had a few of my friends that had kids, was meal times. I saw meal times as a battleground. I saw parents tearing their hair out saying, you must eat this before you eat this, and you have to eat this. And I was like, I really want to have kids when I'm a bit older, but I'm not looking forward to the whole feeding of children at all. I think it's just scary. And it's just one thing that looks like it's really challenging. So when I had my first child, and not that long after he was born, I was on a 100% raw diet. And that kind of having a child as well, I think, kept me on the path, because I really believed that it was the best diet for my children. And I thought, well, I can't be then eating cooked food if I'm thinking, it's the best diet for them to be raw. I wanted to be consistent. I wanted to be on the same diet as them. And just the whole feeding thing, I long-term breastfed, so my children were having, babies are milkarians, but when they started to wean into having some fruit as well, it was so simple. It was so pleasurable, and there was never any stress. It was so stress-free because we'd have a house full of beautiful fruit, and the children, when they got a bit older, would choose what fruit they wanted to eat. Was never any coercion. If they said, I'm not hungry, there was no, you have to eat this dinner meal now. It was just, well, you're not going to starve yourself. When you are hungry, there's plenty of fruit for you to eat. And one thing I noticed with both my children, which I kind of called the lone grape syndrome, was that if I gave them a bag of cherries, or if I gave them a bunch of grapes, they would often just leave one or two, but usually they could just leave one, like one cherry in the bag or one grape on the bunch. And it wasn't a bad grape, it was just they had naturally stopped. Now, the way I was kind of brought up, most people's mindset and the emotional things that we connect with food and feeding, I would have just said, well, I'll just finish it off. There's one left, that's it. But they would both stop when they were satisfied. There wasn't that coercion. You have to finish everything on your plate. You have to finish the last grape. And I really liked that, bringing them up without the emotional rewards of food or the emotional stresses of eating that's often associated with child rearing. It was just really easy, and really there was a flow to it. And I was so thankful for that, after sort of having this thing in my mind that when I had kids, it was going to be like a battle to feed them, and there was going to be all sorts of stresses. And it was just, there was never any stress associated. We just had good fruit in the house. My children, both of them were not really attracted to greens. And sometimes I would get greens in because I think, well, maybe they need them. And they would end up in the compost heap. They weren't really interested in greens. And I think because we always endeavoured to get really good quality fruit and have that available for the children, that their mineral needs, their vitamins, their other micronutrient needs were met by the good quality fruit that they were getting, so that they didn't have a desire for greens. I would have been happy if they said, Mum, I want greens, or if they showed a desire, I would have got greens in. I don't have an issue with them eating greens if that's what they want. But both of them were not really interested in greens. But yeah, I just was so thankful to just have this. It was blissful, really, this blissful feeding experience with both my children, which was really, really lovely. And another thing that I think, I'd read a book when I was in the late stages of pregnancy with my elder son called Three in a Bed by Deborah Jackson, which was all about co-sleeping, which led me into the continuum concept and this idea of attachment parenting. And I really felt that that was so important, as well as the diet. I think the diet is like the backbone that holds things together. So you can do all these other things. You can have, a very attachment-led child, bringing children up like with that attachment parenting, and you can use compassionate communication. But if your child is not given the diet that meets their nutritional needs, that are going to be issues with their health, maybe not so much their mental health, but with their physical health. But for me, the fruit diet and the continuum concept go hand in hand. They're like in tandem, because if you have a child that's on a fruit diet and has this beautiful balanced energy, that isn't sick, that isn't hyperactive, it's so very easy to do the continuum concept, to always be with them. And you always want to be with them. And I can imagine that if you have a child that had fractious energy, that was sick a lot of the time, you could still do the continuum concept, but it would be more challenging. But then on the other hand, you could have the best breast milk in the world. You could, be giving your child the best fruit in the world. But if you're not giving them the love and the security that they need, which is associated with attachment parenting or the continuum concept, then your child won't be well either. But I think when you have both of those, when you have a child that feels loved and secure, that isn't left to cry, that has their emotional needs met, that feels loved, and then is brought up with this inner security that nothing can replace. If a child is brought up and feels abandoned, if they're left to cry, if they're not given that love that they need, they will never have that inner self-confidence and security that comes with bringing up a child with attachment parenting. And then hand in hand with a diet that gives them their nutritional needs, I think is a really wonderful way to bring up children. And I was so thankful that I discovered the fruitarian diet during my first pregnancy, and also discovered about the attachment parenting, co-sleeping, and meeting the emotional needs of the child as well as their dietary needs.
It's so well put, Anne, and I resonate with everything you shared. I feel like there's something about this way of eating that just supports peaceful parenting so well, that when you're feeling your best because of the way you eat, you're able to be more peaceful with your child, with your children. And then also, if you don't have to worry about what's in the pantry, because everything in the pantry is healthy, it's full of peace and well-being, then there's none of this kind of coercion or these fights around food, because everything can be, it's not about too many cookies from the cookie jar, because the cookie jar is filled with apples and persimmons, and so they can have added. So I so resonate with that. And just for anyone listening, to clarify, me as a physician also, and I've shared about my blood test results on this diet, completely amazing, 12 years raw, almost at this point, never had any, just so much healing and no nutritional deficiencies. Can you share about if you came across if your children had any nutritional deficiencies? You mentioned they were very well eating this way.
Yes, they were both very well and healthy. And I think I was kind of expecting that I would have some social situation issues where people would say, you can't bring your child up on that diet. They were both long-term breastfed, which I think is really, really important. And especially the breast milk changes as the children get older. So I think the fact that my youngest son was breastfed for 4 years and my elder son was breastfed for 3.5 years was vitally important, but also the quality of the produce they were eating in addition to the breast milk. Neither of them had any nutritional deficiencies that I am aware of. So with my elder child, we were in the UK and we had a health visitor that was pretty understanding. And the health visitor said, he's on the growth charts of Asian vegetarians, which was helpful to hear because Asian vegetarians usually are more vegan orientated because dairy products aren't such a big thing in Asia, or not traditionally. So I had an understanding health visitor. I think I had never had anybody saying anything about my children's health, because both of them they never got any of the childhood illnesses at all. And almost you want them to get these childhood illnesses, like chickenpox was going around, because if children get it when they're younger, it doesn't affect them so much. So my elder son, he had so much contact. He had contact with his cousins that had chickenpox when we were on holidays, school friends, and he never showed any symptoms of chickenpox. But later, when he had a blood test, he was shown to have antibodies to chickenpox. And I think that is the ultimate immune system for children, is that they are naturally protected. They come into contact with viruses or bacteria or whatever they come into contact to as a child, and they have a natural immunity to these substances, but they do not show any symptoms. So they never show any symptoms of chickenpox or mumps or measles, but they have a natural immunity to it, which lasts them all their lives. So I didn't really get any sort of flack or criticism from people, because they were very happy and healthy. And with my eldest son, this was again in the UK. I went to see this was a government or a state nutritionist. So they weren't any kind of alternative nutritionist, a very standard government nutritionist. And I wrote down everything. I think this was when my son was about 6. I wrote down everything he ate, everything he drank for 2 weeks, and they did a report on it. And I was expecting them to come back and say, look, he's deficient in this, he's not meeting his RDAs on this and that. And I still have the letter. I kept the letter. And they said everything, his RDAs, because he had a wide range of fruits. He also had some raw nuts. They said all his RDAs are being met, with the exception of calcium, which is 70% of the RDA. But he has never had any issues with his bones. He never had any cavities in his teeth. So I believe that he was getting enough calcium. And often if you're on a plant-based diet, you need less calcium than if you're on an animal-based diet, because you're not needing that calcium to buffer the acid-forming foods. So yeah, they were both very happy, very healthy, had really good energy, but they could also sit still. They weren't hyperactive. And I did a talk once on the fruitarian diet, and it was at a meeting, like a health group meeting. The whole meeting went on for about 4 hours. There were 2 speakers. And I took Cappy with me, and he'd been maybe 4 or 5 at the time. And he sat on a chair for 4 hours and just sat there very still, listened to what was going on, was probably very bored as a child and didn't want to be there. And after the talk was finished, this man approached me and he said, I was very impressed with your talk about fruitarianism. But he said, I was more impressed with your child's behavior. You know, if that's how a child behaves on a fruit-based diet, well, yeah, then it works. And, you know, that's what I found with my kids, that they had plenty of energy, but if they had to go somewhere and sit still and be quiet, they could do that for several hours. They had a good attention span. They weren't hyperactive. So I really feel very blessed to have brought up 2 children on the diet, because parenting is full-time. As you would know, it's a full-time job. It's hard work, but it's very enjoyable work if your children are happy and healthy and have good energy and are not sick. So even though it is full-time, it's the most enjoyable job I've ever had. And I just loved bringing up my children. And because they were so spaced out, like there was 12 and a half years between the 2 of them, I was child rearing for something like 31 years. And Cappy, my younger son, he's nearly 19. He's 19 later this month. And it was such a long period. And it was just kind of nice in a way to have that big chunk of my life looking after my children. Yeah.
Amazing. I have a quick question that I want to talk about breastfeeding and weaning.
Mm.
A quick question. Did you supplement? Were there any B12 supplements or anything like that your children, or no?
Yes, they did have some B12 when they were younger, but I was supplementing B12 in both my pregnancies and also in the early months of breastfeeding. And I did supplement them when they were older because I believe that they showed no B12 deficiencies in blood tests or in just their physiology. There was never any symptoms of B12 deficiency. And I also thought, well, that you can store B12. But then I started to supplement after a few years after breastfeeding had stopped because I believed they were getting B12 through the breast milk. So with the breastfeeding, I just supplemented with B12 during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, but not. And then when they were younger, had supplemented of B12, but that was the only supplements that they really had. And
And
that was
you
the only supplement that I took during breastfeeding.
and you mentioned blood tests. Did they go and get blood tests? Did you check their blood work when they were growing? This is a big question because a lot of people on this lifestyle are not interested, especially with the little ones, of getting jabs. I mean, there's two different
Yeah.
jabs, but did you
Yes.
actually get blood drawn from them to check things? And if so, what did that look like, or how often, if you don't mind sharing that?
Not until they were older, so not while they were younger. But I did watch out for any symptoms of B12 deficiency.
Hmm.
And it was like my older son, because he hadn't had any vaccinations and he hadn't had blood taken. When he actually did first have his blood taken, he nearly fainted because he
Yeah.
wasn't used to it. But he was
Hmm.
maybe he was 11 then, so he was older. But it was just like something that I didn't want to subject them to having their blood taken if it wasn't necessary, and they were really healthy and happy, and the fact that they didn't get any with their relatives, with their school friends, with my older son. My younger son was homeschooled, and with children they knew. So for me, the fact that their immune system was very good, they healed very quickly, their skin was good, their hair was good, their teeth were good. All those things for me were more important than a piece of paper that said, yes, they're sufficient in this, they're sufficient in that. I think that you can get everything you need from your diet apart from B12 and vitamin D. Now, some people seem to be able to produce their own B12. And I think that's probably true for children that have been brought up on this diet as well, that they can actually produce and absorb their own vitamin B12. Because I've known people not supplement for 20, 30 years and have no deficiency of B12. Other people I've known have done the diet for 18 months and have needed to supplement.
Hmm.
So I think there's a genetic thing there. I think with the vitamin D, if your child has sufficient sun exposure and not too much, you've got to be careful. You've got to take into account the child's skin and how dark the skin is. And you don't want your child to burn. You don't want your child to get sun damage. And I found with both my children, they both had, they tanned nicely. They never burnt. And I was very careful to make sure that they didn't have too much sun exposure because I didn't want them to have sunburn. But I believe that both of them were getting sufficient vitamin D from sunshine. And like for myself as well, I'm fortunate to live in a sunny climate now, so I don't supplement vitamin D. I think it can be important to supplement B12 in your pregnancy. I had a friend that had a birth. She was on a raw vegan diet and her baby was born, and there was something not right with the baby. Fortunately, a physician was onto it and said, I think this is B12 deficiency. And they gave her son an injection and he was okay. But if it hadn't been noticed by this particular physician, the baby could have got permanent neurological damage through being so severely B12 deficient. So I did supplement B12 in my pregnancies. And I think it's very important, unless you've got really high levels of vitamin B12 naturally, to supplement during pregnancy and maybe the early months of breastfeeding. Folic acid is something that's very, very important in pregnancy as well. With my first pregnancy, my folic acid levels were off the charts. They were really high. They were very high as well in my second pregnancy. So I never supplemented folic acid.
Yeah.
And there's all this thing, well, folic acid's in greens. Well, it is in greens and they're a great source, but also it's in certain fruits. I wasn't eating greens really, and yet still my folic acid was very, very high. So things like avocados and citrus fruits are very good for folic acid. But I think that's another one to watch. Folic acid, vitamin D, and B12. And it might well be the case that if you're on a raw vegan diet, you have very high levels of folic acid naturally, and you might not need to supplement, because folic acid is very much damaged by heat. So when you're having a raw diet, you're much more likely to have good levels naturally of folic acid than if you cook the majority of your food.
So much wisdom here. And I hope, just to reiterate a few things, I definitely believe in B12 supplementation during pregnancy. I did. And I have a few raw vegan, what I eat in a day, and supplementation during my pregnancy. I documented that. I talk about supplementation. I also am fortunate to be somewhere, and I'm also very melanated. And those of us who have high melanin, vitamin D absorption is even more important because we don't absorb the D. So I've never had to supplement D because I've always been in sunny places. I get myself exposed. So this is really important. Vitamin D, B12, folic acid. I smile because I just had so much oranges, ripe oranges, and oranges are one of the best sources of folic acid. And I felt my craving for oranges really increased when I was pregnant. I think it had to do with folic acid and just getting your levels checked. If you're not sure, especially pregnancy wise, I really believe in that. You don't have to do the pharmaceutical route, but you have the information to then decide what you want to do. I want to talk breastfeeding because I love breastfeeding, and I have a 3-year-old now, and I'm still happily breastfeeding. And I know there are women who struggle with it. And I want to ask you a couple very, very pointed questions around it. One issue I think some women have, and I have a video about breastfeeding with ease. So some women may have painful breasts. I found it to be extremely so pleasant, so beautiful, and a way to take care of my little one when he does get, rarely, but when he does get not feeling the best. I get the breast milk is so full of these incredible immune system supporters. Two issues I see with breastfeeding, or two huge challenges. One is possibly the social challenge. So we travel a lot, and I'm breastfeeding my child all the time. I love scarves, thankfully, and I'll just kind of cover it, especially when right now we're in Indonesia and in Muslim countries, or sometimes I'll have to go to a room to do it. But most of the time I just feed him on demand. When he wants it and he needs it, it's there. But some women feel a little bit uncomfortable around that. And I wanted to know if you have any wisdom around that. And the second question is about weaning, especially night weaning. So I thought, I need to night wean my child. I keep hearing that night weaning is a thing. It needs to happen. We co-sleep. And frankly, we've gotten to the stage now. He probably breastfeeds maybe once during the night. And it looks like he rolls over, gets some milk, and I don't have to even wake up. So I'm like, do I really need to night wean? And so I'm curious to know your thoughts about the importance of night weaning. The only other thing I wonder about night weaning is for the teeth health. So the other thing is, like, you can't, if you don't night wean, his teeth are going to get so bad. My little one fell when he was about almost 2 years old and broke about 3 of his teeth. And that put him at risk for cavities. He did get cavities there. They've been healing naturally, but he does have a few cavities. So he's not cavity free, but he eats a fruit-based vegan diet, high raw. He has some cooked with his father because his father has cooked food, but very healthy. and I think he's been healing naturally. So I'm asking questions around breastfeeding also from the point of view of dentition. Do you believe in night
Yes.
weaning? And if so, what are your recommendations? And then also the thing about the social aspect of breastfeeding.
Yes. Yeah. So the social aspect, I think, can be challenging because society is a bit topsy-turvy. They see it perfectly natural and healthy to see a picture of, say, a 4-year-old child having a glass of cow's milk. And at the same time, it's quite shocking to see a 4-year-old breastfeeding. And I think that's because we're not used to it. In societies where they don't have domesticated animals for dairy, it's quite usual for people to breastfeed their children for 4 years. And I really think that 3.5, 4 years is a good time to feed your child for if you can. Because when you look at the spacing as well of children, a lot of societies, because breastfeeding can help with prevention of future pregnancies, depending on how much you're breastfeeding, there's often a 4-year gap. And I think that 4-year gap also gives a woman a chance for her body to recover between pregnancies. And then she finishes feeding a child at 4 years, and then maybe she'd want to get pregnant again. So I think in societies where cows are domesticated, goats are domesticated, and it's seen as natural and healthy to have other animals' milk, we are more socially challenged. Now, I think as well, a lot of it is our mental attitude, what we put out. If we feel uncomfortable, if we feel unsure, other people will pick up on that and it'll be mirrored back to us. I always felt very confident breastfeeding. I was always like had a shawl or a cardigan or something. I didn't like whip my breasts out in public. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I was discreet, but I never had any issues with, I breastfeed everywhere. And I found that I had a positive reaction mostly from people. I remember being on a train in the UK and breastfeeding my elder son, and one of the ticket collectors came along and said, "Oh, would you like to go in first class?" And I said, "Oh, thanks." So he took me to a first class carriage. There was nobody, and just to give me that privacy, which was nice. I've never had anybody, fortunately, come up to me and say, I'm uncomfortable with that. Can you not breastfeed? And I think that must be very challenging for women if somebody comes up to them and they're doing the most natural thing in the world. They're doing something that's giving their child health and wellness, and somebody comes up and is kind of dismissive of them or is, upset at them. I think that must be very hard. And I think to have the mental attitude that these people haven't made the connection. It's their problem. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing the best for my child, and to not take it personally, although that would be very hard because breastfeeding is a very personal thing. It's a very beautiful bond between a mother and her child. So to have somebody come up and say that what you're doing is disgusting or inappropriate, when it's the most appropriate thing, if a 4-year-old child was sitting next to you drinking a glass of cow's milk, no one's going to come up and say, well, that's inappropriate, that's disgusting. Which is more natural, giving your child your own milk that's perfectly formulated for them, or giving them milk from another species where that species babies have been separated from them, mostly in most commercial dairy industry practices. So I think we have to accept that society is not always rational. When we accept that society is not always rational, what we're doing is rational. There's nothing more rational than feeding your child long term for 3.5, 4 years, or maybe longer if the child needs milk for longer. There's nothing more rational. There's nothing more natural. But people haven't made that connection. There's something that's considered weird or strange about long-term breastfeeding because people aren't used to seeing it. People aren't used to the concept of a toddler breastfeeding, and we've have this sexualization of breasts, or this over-sexualization of breasts. And so that their original purpose of feeding is sort of seen as being disgusting or weird, which is a shame. And when people make that connection and realize that breastfeeding is perfectly natural at 6 months, at 4 years old, there's not a stage where it's like, it's not natural anymore. And what I think is interesting is it's linked again to cultural norms and what's seen as appropriate or not appropriate. For instance, what was interesting, I'm going to talk about Bali now. I was in Bali many years ago and I saw older women in the fields, working in the fields, and they were topless. Younger women were all covered up. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe it's because when a woman gets past a certain age, she's not seen as sexual anymore, so she can go out and work topless in the fields as the men do. And so I asked somebody and they said, it's actually because years ago, the breasts weren't considered sexual and it was considered appropriate for women to work in the fields without any kind of covering on their tops. And then as society has changed, now women have to cover up. And I think that's very interesting. And it's society's cultural norms that dictate really how people respond to us if we're breastfeeding in public. But I think if a woman is unsure about breastfeeding in public, there's usually a place you can go. You can be discreet. You don't have to breastfeed in public if you don't feel comfortable with it. But if you do feel comfortable with it, I think have that energy, put it out there that you're doing something very worthwhile. And if somebody comes and gives you a hard time, don't go into that energy. Realize, it's not personal. They just don't know. They've not got the knowledge that you have. They're uneducated on it. And so they're reacting in that way. But yeah, I think sending out energy that what you're doing is wonderful really can help, because people will often mirror back that energy to you. And it's just so important to me, long-term breastfeeding. It's one of the most wonderful things we can do for our children's health.
So I love your talk about energy, and it's been exactly my experience traveling the world, being in Malaysia, Indonesia, places that are very Muslim based, but just doing it even in public, in airports, while we're waiting for things, in bus stations, in a way that is the energy of love. That this is the ambrosia of love that I'm giving my child. And if someone is looking at me, looking back at them with love and keeping that energy and not dropping into a vibration of judgment or fear, because so many times it's triggering for them in some way that they don't even understand, but just mirroring love. And if you don't want to meet someone's eyes, I practice pratyahara, the idea of withdrawing the senses, going into the bubble of just you and your child. No matter if people are around, it's about you and that child's connection, because the child also feels that energy. And we are also patterning a idea of mother is here to feed you and to give you love, and it doesn't matter the energy around here. And then they take on that confidence. Our children really pick up on our energy. So I love that you brought that in, and I think it's something that goes beyond even the borders of long-term breastfeeding. It's the idea of having that energy of confidence and calm and love while you're living this lifestyle, which I think you embody so well. Can you talk about night weaning really quickly?
Yes.
Do you believe in it? Did you do it? And also maybe talk a little bit about self-weaning versus child-led weaning or mother-led weaning, or weaning, night weaning, and weaning in general.
Yes, certainly. So with my eldest son, I fed him until he was 3.5. I didn't do night weaning. That was the only time really he was feeding, was in the morning, and maybe he'd have a feed occasionally in the middle of the night, or if he got upset. And I found it, like you were saying, invaluable. You were saying if your child is a bit under the weather, but I found like breastfeeding invaluable if my child fell over or hurt themselves or wanted that comfort. Then it was just like a real way to instantly comfort the child. So yeah, towards the end, he was 3.5, and I didn't think he was getting that much out of the milk. And I was getting pressure to wean him. Oh, you shouldn't be feeding him this long, from friends. And I sort of submitted to that pressure, especially from one particular person. And I really wish I hadn't. Looking back on it, I wish I hadn't, because my older son asked me, he said he wanted milk. And I said, oh, we don't have milk anymore. And that still sticks with me. I wish that I'd let him totally self-wean And I hadn't had to say, no, we don't have milk anymore when he wanted it. I felt that that did him a disservice in some way. So I thought with my second son, or if I have any more children, I thought I will let them self-wean, because I wasn't comfortable with that. I thought I want to learn from that experience. And now it still makes me feel a bit sad that he asked for milk and I said, oh, we don't have milk anymore when he wanted it. But what I noticed with my eldest son was when he stopped milk, and I believe he wanted to go on for longer, and he would have gone on for a bit longer. How much longer, I don't know. When he stopped having milk, and he was only really having maybe 1-2 feeds a day, I didn't think he was getting that much out of the milk. When he stopped, he ate twice as much as he'd been eating before.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, he must have been getting so much from the milk. And he wasn't ready to stop, because he's now eating twice as much fruit and nuts as he was before. And I was amazed that he was getting so much from the milk that he needed to double the rest of the fruit and the nuts he was eating. So I thought, right, any more children, they're going to self-wean. With my younger son, I thought, I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm going to listen to myself. I'm going to let him self-wean. And he almost self-weaned to the day of his 4th birthday. And when he stopped having milk, I didn't notice any increase in the food he was eating. So that showed me that my first child wasn't really ready to wean. He was still getting a lot from the milk, and I was listening to other people rather than my own self. And I learned from that. So with my second child, I was going to totally let him self-wean, and he did, and he was 4. And you mentioned before about the night feeding and teeth.
Yes.
And I think that possibly can be an issue. With my elder son, he didn't feed as much at night, and his teeth were better than my younger son. I think there was genetics in there as well, who fed more at night for a certain period of time. But then towards the end, he wasn't feeding so much at night. And there is sugar in milk. It's natural sugar. It's milk sugar, lactose, I believe. But I think that potentially could be an issue. With my elder son, he maybe fed once a night towards the end, and he didn't have any issues. But I do think genetically his teeth were stronger. With my younger son, he fed more at night. Towards the end, it was only once. But I think there were some issues from him feeding a lot at night, that he had a bit of an issue with some of his front teeth when he was younger. So I think that is something, and I don't really know the answer to that, the balance between the comfort a child is getting at night through feeding. It would seem if it's just once or twice a night, with my children, it wasn't an issue. But if they're feeding more at night, then potentially it could be an issue. But again, genetics, depending on how strong your child's teeth are.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the honesty with that answer, Anne. And I'll just share that my little one also, I think this is natural progression, especially if they're co-sleeping, or especially if you're able to go feed when they're desiring it. I see this just natural decline in the need for the breast milk, to the point that there are many nights that he doesn't even breastfeed me, but I've never had to say no breast milk at night. It just has happened naturally. And I think also it goes back to the whole peaceful and attachment parenting, is that when again they're feeling secure and they're feeling safe and they're feeling maybe I don't know the data on this, and I don't think there is, but they don't need maybe as much during the night. There's a sense of like, I'm fine, I'm safe, I'm okay, and there's this natural need decline in the need for breast milk. And I think that I love that you talked about genetics with teeth also, because I get a lot of questions around teeth. I have one small cavity in my mouth from before I was raw. I've had no cavities since I've been raw. My teeth are, my dentist will say, I wish everybody's teeth was like this when they came to me. It makes it so easy. But my child, after breaking his teeth, has had about 3 or 4 cavities. They haven't progressed. Well, we've had to deal with that. And that is sometimes something in this lifestyle. So I think it's important to talk about it honestly. and to know that there are natural routes. And anybody's interested, maybe leave a comment down below if you want me to make more videos around this, or maybe talk to Anne more in the future about this if she's willing. But I think talking about dentition is really important, because I think it's one of the things that can make people really worried on this lifestyle.
Yes, and I think genetics definitely plays a part, because I brought my children up pretty much on the same diet. My younger son did feed more at night, but apart from that, they had the very, very similar diet. And my eldest son's teeth, like, he's just, I think, had his first cavity, and he's 31 now, just had his first cavity. With Cappy, his teeth were good, but we had to do more work. With my older son, it was just brush your teeth twice a day. With Cappy, it was like brushing your teeth with a toothpaste that helps with enamel regeneration, having maybe an electric toothbrush, making sure you floss your teeth. There was more. His teeth, like, are good, they're fine now. He's nearly 19, but we had to put more into his teeth. Whereas with my eldest son, it was just like brush your teeth twice a day, not really any issues. So I think that some people have genetically stronger teeth. Also, the bacteria that are in our mouths that cause decay, some people don't have those bacteria. Some people never have them. So some people can eat sweets, they can eat chocolate, they can not really care for their teeth, and they don't get the decay. Whereas other people can be quite mindful of dental hygiene, but if there's any bacteria in their mouths, they can get decay. And really, I think it's very important to brush your children's teeth, because if you have good dental hygiene, even if your child is more susceptible because they've got the bacteria that cause decay or their teeth aren't as strong, if you clean their teeth properly and remove the bacteria, they can't get cavities in the same way. So I think, but we have to accept that you can be feeding your children the same, but one child might have stronger teeth. They might not have the bacteria in their mouths that cause decay, and the other child might. So you might have to do more dental hygiene procedures with one child than another. I think that's important.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think let's wrap up, because it's been a beautiful lot. I feel like I talked to you for several more hours, but I appreciate your time and all the wisdom you shared. And can you share with the people who are listening where they can connect with you if they're wanting to?
Yes, I do quite a lot on Facebook. So I share albums of old newspaper clippings all about the fruit diet and fruitarianism, and information about fruit and fruit growing. So on Facebook, I'm Fruit Bat Anne. If you search for Anne Osbourne, and my URL, I think, is like Facebook/Fruit Bat Anne. I also have a website where I've got articles and contact details, and that's fruitgod.com. And then I'm on Instagram as Fruity's Butte. So search for Anne Osbourne. So I do share a lot of things on those 3 platforms, and that's a good way to connect with me. And I have contact details on my website, fruitgod.com, if you want to send me an email or ask me any questions.
Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing this time and your wisdom and your love with us. I will leave links to Anne's information down in the description box below, so definitely check that out. Again, on this channel, you can look back at some of the raw vegan pregnancy and raw vegan mothering videos I already have out, and feel free to leave questions in the comments below. Thank you. This has been incredible. And we send you, I believe, both Anne and I send you love wherever in the world you are. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.